Very interesting. Of course, is it that interesting, or is it surprise? Is it really surprising at this point that DEI and ESG scores in this particular case, DEI scores in regards to corporate America adopting this widespread, shows no favorable data or repeatability in science in regards to actually helping the bottom line for shareholders? What a surprise! Because we're back to what back in 2016 through 2020, the equality of outcome versus the equality of opportunity, right? So it really comes down to, is it going to be a merit-based situation where people actually don't discriminate based on immutable characteristics that have nothing to do with their person, such as their height, their skin color, their sex, their age, these sorts of things, and actually discriminate based on whether they can do the thing that they need the person to do, rather than just trying to meet these sort of artificial quotas based on immutable characteristics that have nothing to do and nothing to say about whether the person is capable of doing the things. And then so we're back to what this cultural insanity in regards to merit versus opportunity, which is equity. That's the big buzzword, I think, over the past like 6, 7, 8 years. Equity, 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 which is really just the quality of opportunity. A lot, forcing these like arbitrary social standards through this sort of postmodern agenda, where we're going to define ourselves based on these immutable characteristics rather than our ability to be able to provide value for ourselves and for other people. But that's the type of insane culture we live in today, where people can actually make those sorts of arguments and get away with it.
Is equity mean that it's for everyone?
Yeah, equity truly means, one white person's hired, one black person's hired, one, it's pure. That's the way they look at it, I guess.
Because I happen to know that the NHL it practices DEI,
Mm.
diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I thought to look it up because there used to be a name for it. So this is now it's called Hockey is for Everyone. Watch what happens. Oops, oops.
Oh, it's
I think they
hilarious.
found out it doesn't work. Maybe it didn't used to be called that. I forget what it was called. Uh, I worked for a DEI initiative, 1998. It was a long time ago, and it wasn't a big deal back then. NHL ran a program, and it was for the benefit of inner city youths, right? And this was in DC, and I had just moved for a job. Where was I living? I was living in Georgetown, and it's like you're new to a town. There's like work and there's bars. I was looking for something healthy to do in between. I was looking for public service. What could I do to volunteer someplace and be useful? Someone at work told me about this initiative that was called, I forget what it was called, but it wasn't called Hockey Was for Everyone. And so I'd go to this ice rink in Anacostia in DC, and these were like the little brothers of gangbangers and stuff that were
Mm.
teaching how to skate. And I worked with Hall of Fame hockey player Willie O'Ree, who was the first. He's the Jackie Robinson of the NHL. And so, like, we coached these kids. I don't know. I was probably down there for 18 months. And it was really cool. And I never had a problem in that neighborhood whatsoever, even though everyone I worked with thought I was crazy for trying to go into that part of DC as a
Mm.
white person. So, like, if you believe that, I guess you'll have those problems. But if
In the
you're going,
90s, it
yeah, I
was
mean,
nothing comparatively. Was it the 90s? I
what was
assume,
like the
or early
murder
2000s.
capital of the world at the time. So, like, it
Yeah.
was a little edgy down there.
Hmm. I'm just saying, juxtaposed to now, I think it's much, much, much worse. I mean, at that
Oh,
time in the
yeah.
late 90s, like people, the majority of African American or Black individuals in America stated that racism was not the most concerning point. This is something that, what's his name, Larry Elder, always points out. It's a very famous poll that was done in the late 90s that showed racism was not a major talking point from even Black Americans because they weren't experiencing it in very conspicuous forms throughout their life. Was it an issue? Yes, they rated it like 3 or 4, but it was not the most pressing issue in their life. Whereas now, thanks to the whole culture war, catalyzed by postmodernism, we're in a situation where everyone only sees everything through race. We see it in sports, we see it in the business world. It's just absolutely obnoxious. In the DEI world, I mean, that's really just being strong armed by what the like Vanguard or BlackRock or State Street, because they're funding so much. Of course, they've started backing out of that a little bit after they got all these businesses to invest millions, if not billions of dollars into these initiatives. Boy, what a surprise. Hmm.
Well, and the other thing is there's a bifurcation like in DC from my experience for
Hmm.
sure. The bifurcation is there, but it's not necessarily racist. It probably started as racism, but it manifests today as like financial inequality
Hmm.
because I was just thinking through it, and Gatto was known because he taught like rich kids in New York City and poor kids in New York City, and found out they had the same aptitude. Well, I coached not only for that NHL program that helped those kids learn to skate, right, and
Hmm.
find better things to do with their time instead of being on the street. But I also coached at the same time for the Washington Junior Capitals. So I was coaching the rich people's kids, and I was coaching kids that couldn't afford to buy any of their own equipment.
Right.
And these kids that I was coaching in Anacostia, they had talent.
Hmm.
They picked it up. They could
Oh
skate,
yeah.
they could pass, they could shoot, they could do all these things. And they wanted to like, because they knew I coached that our team. What could we do to coach? Like, what can we do to get on that team? And those teams would have taken those kids if those
Oh
kids
yeah.
could pay the fee.
Yeah.
So
The
it was a
prohibitive
financial
fact.
thing.
Yeah.
It
The
didn't matter
prohibitive.
about your skin color. That barrier was broken 20 years ago in hockey.
Well
But the
said.
financial barrier was still there, and it's still there
Exactly.
today.
Yeah, the prohibitive factor is 100% financial. It really comes down to it's the same issue with football, but there's a difference. The NFL subsidizes local, small, like, pee-wee programs and up to the high school level. They actually fund all these programs, whereas the NHL, I don't think does in the inner cities. So in other words, like the prohibitive factor is the cost of the equipment, the rink. It's just that the number of inputs that are needed. Whereas football, the cost is certainly similar in regards to all the equipment you need, but then you just need a field, right? And so
Yeah.
that's something that's
Right,
much
right,
the
right. I mean,
but the NFL still goes out of their way to subsidize inner city for the inner city, particularly, and high schools in the inner
well,
city.
all the
Or
big programs do now.
oh, do they?
NHL,
Okay,
NFL,
that makes sense because NHL is one of
NBA.
yeah, NBA has been doing it
Yeah.
and the NBA automatically gets because all they requires is a basketball and like a double rimmed hoop with some chains
Yeah.
and that'll be up forever.
And I'm
And
reasonably sure the only reason the NHL did this program for these kids at that time is because they had just cut deals with Nike. And so these kids were all getting Nike equipment, which was long-term branding strategy from a Nike
yeah,
perspective that trickled down. And if I, at this point, in any point description said I worked for the NHL, I did not. I was a volunteer for an NHL program. And it was at Fort DuPont Ice Rink with
yeah,
Willie
that's a good
O'Ree.
clarification. Yeah, you were a
Oh yeah.
volunteer. You did
Just
not
for the
get paid
future.
for
Yeah.
your services.
I volunteered my time. I went there consistently. I worked with Willie O'Ree. We taught these kids how to skate and pass and shoot and all that good stuff.
I
That
think
was
that
fun.
now the stigma is the fact that the NHL is considered sort of a
Well,
it's
now
not
it's
just
like all overboard where they got to wear rainbow stuff everywhere. Like,
yeah,
it's a whole different
but
DEI today than the original idea 20 plus years ago, is my point.
yeah, that's right.
It actually
And
used to
it's
perform some useful services for the community, and people were enriched from that. And it didn't take anything from those kids. Like
and
those
it,
kids received, and the NHL, like they weren't like necessarily going to NHL games. Well, they probably did start to go to NHL games.
I mean, it's also a factor of like the culture of the inner city is just because of historical circumstances are going to be much more have a stronger penchant for basketball and football as opposed to hockey. So no matter how much outreach they do in those inner cities, it's just the effect of what football and basketball has on young individuals within those cities, especially the peer pressure amongst their own to consider adopting what is a white man sport, which is an absurd way of looking at it. But I think that's also a pressure that's put on themselves and the culture that black people have sort of spoken to in regards to how much they've been taught to kind of look at their own so insulated culture in a certain way and not look outside of that and to other opportunities and other things they can do. It's like they're being trained to only see themselves as victims in a sense, and that goes for so many other groups as well. And
And
that's
trained.
yeah, end trained over, and that happened really with the '60s initiatives. So it's not because they were actually much more free. And if you take the statistics of Lincoln Riley or Larry Elder or Thomas Sowell, free from the standpoint of economic freedom back during Jim Crow, at least in regards to number of doctors and lawyers and the way the bankers in the inner city in their own communities that helped to maintain at a time when there were objectively evil laws on the book like enforcing actual segregation. they were still able to. So something changed. What changed? They turned everyone into a victim. And it's happening in the white community too. This is not an issue of skin color. It just happened to them first. They were the first to be impacted, but we're seeing it in the Midwest when it comes to white culture, or if you want to call it white culture, whatever, poor white folk in the Appalachian, regions, and deeper into the Midwest and West, the drug addiction, the fatherless households, all the same problems we've been seeing in the with Black community is certainly permeating now in the white community. And it's not something specific to color. It's something specific to becoming dependent on government, on institutions, and
it's how the government gets votes.
Yes, right, and also breaking down the family. Getting rid of the father figure, getting rid of any sort of like standard sort of traditional family unit.
And the deep state's all based on racism. The whole deep state apparatus is based on racism and slavery. Yes.
Yeah. The propedeutic function that's learned in school. That was Alexander Inglis's. That's Gatto. We're talking about Gatto. The propedeutic function is, it's like, stay in your caste. We're going to learn what your caste is in school, and you're going to stay in it. And the fourth season of The Wire shows that so brilliantly, when that smart young,
or the last season of Deadwood, both of those shows, like, stay in your lane.
Yeah, because I remember the boxing guy who starts the gym, who is a former soldier. He's talking to one of the young little guys, and he's like, "How do I go from here to there? How do I go from here?" And he's like, "I don't know." He's like, "I don't know, because we've always been here in, like, what is inner city Baltimore, and this life and this milieu. Like, they don't know how to take that step, because that's the purpose. That's the propedeutic function." Anyways,
the way to tie the story together is, if 20 years ago we had this medical assistance in dying and this euthanasia for people in their 20s, like, if I had moved to a new town and I was bored and I didn't consider public service of some sort, hey, you got all these booths around for euthanasia, maybe people will be pushing those buttons. So, like, those stories, even though it's kind of like, those people, they've got issues, not everyone's going to be using that. Like, they can normalize these things. Next thing you know, your grandmother doesn't want to go to a retirement home or move in with you or whatever. And now it's the next option right on the list. Well, we could just put you out next week. We could put you out on schedule. The same way they bring people in on cesarean section is what this medical assistance and dying and euthanasia is for not people with terminal illnesses.
It's a great analogy to C-sections. Yeah, that's it's a slippery slope fallacy, or fallacy of the mean, in a sense. But it's a combination of the two. By allowing this one thing, it's going to
they're Caligula sections. Because C-section is after Caesar, and then I was like, who's the opposite of Caesar? Caligula. We could make a neologism if we needed to for that.
It's unfortunate. I mean, that's insane, but the normalization that will come with it, especially in a time where this one ties it all together, is, the breakdown of the traditional family, the atomization of the individual, all these conditions.
And they don't know how to think their way out of any type of situation.
And they don't have any, Aristotle had this concept of the intellectual virtues, where, like, there's wisdom is a reward in itself, the exploration of abstract conceptual ideas, the idea of, like, understanding various viewpoints and how we arrived at these viewpoints philosophically, theologically, whatever. There's a certain reward that comes with that. Otherwise, I don't think humans would have ascertained or considered, that as being a value pursuit, something valuable in their lives and worth spending time doing for now millennia. So, in that capacity, that's also something that I think this whole notion of not entertaining or developing the inner life and consciousness, as John Taylor Gatto, so adroitly described it, and expertly so. I mean, that is true. And, in this milieu of a culture where there's so much stimulation, artificial stimulation, so little is done to cultivate the mind and some of the intangible values that come with the cultivation of the mind. People are sort of left in this box of, like, nothing. It's like, well, if normal sensory experience isn't enough for them, or they're not finding enough out of that, the only thing left then, I guess, is that there's no inner life or consciousness. So they then just deduce that the only thing left is death. They're sort of living. They're like the Walking Dead in a metaphorical sense.
I wonder if they'll start giving people a financial incentive to press the button earlier. Like, if you choose a expedited death, And then if there's probably like some
Especially for
Jason
older.
Statham movie about this where it's like, okay, so you chose your death in 3 months and now they've given you $6 million to spend because it would have cost the world $35 million to keep you alive. So
Dude,
you go on this, and
they're
then
gonna do
people spend
carousel.
that money, start enjoying life, and they try to escape. It's like a Logan's Run for the modern day,
Yeah,
and we
it's a
could work in
Logan's,
social credit score and stuff with it.
and it's gonna be a fallacy of the mean because they're gonna actually really start it with, older individuals. I bet you any money they'll start with older because like the demographic situation is
They're
we're
going to
very
offer them young bodies, dude. That's a whole market. You
because
can't, don't mess with that market segment. There's that whole, blood boy segment over
but
there.
there's like the incentive economically though because of the demographic, inversion that's happening with not enough productive people, too many old people in retirement. They're going to incentivize the hell out of the countries that approve of these sorts of values and these policies and improve them in their parliaments or whatever. They're going to incentivize heavily the older people dying first and foremost, and like probably with financial incentives, and maybe we'll give it to their family and all this sorts of nonsense. It's going to be really tragic to see. That's just a speculation, but we'll see if it ends up panning out. But yeah, I'm on board. Unfortunately, like that's not on board with what they're doing, but on board with your statements in regards to they probably are going to financially incentivize it in some capacity. And I bet you any money they'll go really hard at the older people first, and then they'll slowly start trickling it down through fallacy of the mean to younger and younger ages.
Look at what they did just for the vaccine. They gave
Exactly.
out donuts and strippers and all sorts of stuff to people just to get a jab. What do you think they'd do to get you out of the picture?
Yeah.
I mean, not
Yeah,
just
I mean,
drone
in
strikes.
fucking the red light district over in like what Denmark or whatever, they had like you get free sex.
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, that's right,
I don't think
Amsterdam.
it's free, but it's like
Discounted
it's like
sex. There's something crazy. They put a
it's
vaccine
like
thing
a
right
vending
next to
machine of
the.
people. Like a
Mhm.
building is a vending machine of people in
But
that
then in New
district.
York, Cuomo, eating what In-N-Out burger or some shit like that. Not
Oh
In-N-Out.
yeah, they were
Was it?
offering that too.
Was it
And he was
In-N-Out?
eating
I
the
forget.
burger. He's like, "Come on, man."
It wasn't
Yeah.
In-N-Out. I'm thinking of the
No,
West Coast now, but it was I forget. It was some famous burger place in New York, I guess.
Kumar and Harold and Kumar go to where?
White Castle?
That's what I'm pretty sure it was White Castle,
It
wasn't
wasn't
it?
White Castle, no.
All right, I don't have the answer now.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I'll
Maybe it was White Castle. I don't think so. I
I'll
hope
phone a friend in the next segment. All right, so this next segment coming up that I have to introduce it's multifaceted. So in the highest level, there's this Israel-Palestine aspect, right? And there's a lot of lobbying and permeation into our government, all these sort of things go on, right? So the only weakness that they're really trying to protect is public opinion. They can commit genocide or ethnic cleansing as fast as public opinion and the Overton window kind of allows them to do this. This has become evident, and people like Patrick Bet-David and Andrew Schultz have started commenting on these things. And now with the focus point down here on the ground of Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro, they're now going to face off on the meaning of anti-Semitism because, as we all know, definitions morph and mutate, and you have to take snapshots of them occasionally to see what they really mean today. So they're going to have that conversation, but it represents a much, much, much bigger problem of Israel losing the public opinion war. They're a whole bunch of other stuff, and they're kind of now coming to say the quiet part out loud. Like, we're going to play a clip tonight, and it's a rabbi, and he says we've lost the public opinion war, and it's now just to say we need to exterminate these people and get rid of them, and so on and so forth. We'll also hear similar talking points from a couple other people who kind of said the quiet part out loud. That one was a Timcast clip that we're going to look at tonight. So several news clips, different nuances on world events and where our taxpayer dollars are going in a way that has finally kind of reached a tipping point with public opinion with the events in this past week particular. So if you've kind of like glossed over most of what's happened in the past 6 months, it's like gone like this, but now we're actually getting to a point where there could be a little bit of a ceasefire. Israel is definitely retracting troops. They're leaving 1,000 troops in Rafah. They're not going to carry out this heavy duty invasion. And it's not
And
because of Biden and Blinken. It's because of people pushing back on social media and calling a spade a spade,
it's also fortuitous in
calling a
regards to the
shovel a
fact
shovel.
because the only real two supporters of Israel in this regard are the Anglo-American establishment, so the United States and Great Britain. So in this
Yeah.
case, right now we have a major election. So it's fortuitous in the sense that there's a major election coming up, and this is an issue. This is an issue for both sides, actually.
And Bibi, all three sides of the Anglo-American Israeli establishment are having problems holding their ground right
So
now.
there's going to be hard just to continue like full steam ahead It's if you're trying to get the necessary votes for whatever side you're supposed to, and that goes for both Democrats, conservatives, and independents, at least speaking on the American side. So that's an issue. Britain's done this abstinence, sort of abstaining from votes and all this sort of nonsense, but we all know how much support has gone in from the Great Britain side as well, and how many Palestinian refugees actually are in Great Britain as we speak. So it's fortuitous in the sense that it could create a situation of a more semi-permanent ceasefire, at least like one that extends beyond just 2 weeks, or whatever these superficial ones have been thus far. I think there's only been one talk of another, but I don't know if that's actually going into that's being manifest or not, the one that we talked about last week. But so you're right. I mean, I just want to point out, and it's also fortuitous in combination with the fact that there's a major election going on in the U.S., which are the main supporters right now, conspicuous supporters, I should say, of Israel's genocidal policies, literally genocidal policies. It was de Blasio, by the way, and Shake Shack. So just to clarify the record.
Thank you. We want a sparkling clean record on this show. No corrections afterwards. Find the errors during the show so we can correct them so we don't have to do retractions. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happen. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.